You probably heard that the universe is expanding, but how do we know and what exactly does that mean? Well, light is made up of waves, and waves have a property called wavelength, which is the distance between peaks. The visible spectrum is all the colors that correspond to a single wavelength of light. Usually, the wavelength of light emitted is the same as the wavelength received, but occasionally the wavelength of light might be longer when received, meaning it'll move towards the red end of the spectrum. We call this redshifting.
An example of redshifting is when the light source moves further away from the observer, causing the wave in between them to expand.
Before the discovery of the expansion of the universe, we already knew this. But in 1929, Edwin Hubble used his theory of redshifting to conclude that space was stretching. He noticed that all the light emitted from galaxies was redshifting, which showed us they were all moving away from Earth. But how do we know these galaxies aren't just moving through space away from us, not the space itself expanding? Well, the other thing Hubble noticed was that the galaxies further from Earth redshift more. Basically, the amount light from a galaxy redshifts is directly proportional to the distance that galaxy is from Earth. This tells us that the amount galaxies are moving isn't random. This pattern then can only really be explained by space itself stretching. Let's take a look at this oatmeal raisin cookie. The cookie represents the universe while the raisins represent the galaxies. The little waves between the raisins and the center of the cookie, which is us, will represent the light waves emitted by the galaxies. Notice that as the cookie is expanding, the waves are too. Additionally, the waves to the further galaxies are even longer and thus more redshifted. Let's zoom in a little to understand what's happening at the atomic level with these waves. The waves of light are also a photon particle. As the photon moves through space and space stretches, the photon is also being stretched. At this point, you might be wondering, is the Earth expanding too? Am I expanding too? No. The Earth and the objects within our galaxies are held together by gravitational and electric forces, which basically overpower any expansion. If we go back to our cookie, we can see that the raisins are held together more strongly than the cookie dough, and thus the force of expansion doesn't really affect them at all. This is the same with us and our galaxy. The forces holding us together are much greater than any expansion forces, so we'll be fine. And maybe this can teach us a lesson. Sometimes the things you consider to be big and really important don't have that big of an impact on you.